Hi, I'm Nica Waters.
And I'm Carolyn Sherlock.
And welcome to the Boat Galley Podcast. We thought we'd take advantage of being together to just do a little introduction. Maybe you don't know who we are, or maybe we're going to give you some more information about us.
Yes, this is the fun part of this whole deal. Nica and I have known each other for however many years. We see each other at the boat show every year, and then we go our separate ways. And now she has ended up here in West Palm Beach, which is where I'm currently. And because of weather, the weather gods, of course, they're here for a little bit extra time. And we're here doing it.
Today's episode of the Boat Galley Podcast is sponsored by MantisMarine.com, maker of the Mantis Anchor, now available in models with and without a roll bar. Proven to set reliably in the most challenging bottoms, the Mantis Anchor digs like no other, making anchoring safer and boating more enjoyable. Mantis Marine brings to market practical, durable, and affordable marine products, including anchoring gear, scuba diving accessories, rechargeable waterproof headlamp for hands-free lighting, and solar charging navigation lights for your dinghy. Visit MantisMarine.com and see for yourself.
So, Nica, first of all, you've been cruising, 30-some years now?
On and off for 31, 32 years. On and off, though, not constantly.
And what's your boat? And you still have your original boat, right? And then there's another boat?
There's another one. We have a Bristol Channel Cutter, which is a 28-foot classic design, full keel, heavy displacement, long bowsprit. We're 37 feet overall. It looks a lot like Lynn and Larry Pardee's boats. If you don't know them, we'll put a link in the show notes to a book that you can find out about Lynn and Larry Pardee and their boats. But we have owned this one, Calypso, since 1992, and we love these kinds of boats so much we actually added a second one to our fleet called Mischief, and we bought her in 2021. She's a 1983 hull.
Okay, so now, when you got this boat way back in 92, where was your first big adventure?
So we were based in Texas. We were based in Houston, Texas, and found the boat in Kemah, which is Galveston Bay, and we worked on her for a couple of years to get her shipshape, and then we took 3 years and went from Houston along the Gulf Coast, down the west coast of Florida, and then down Bahamas all the way down to the Eastern Caribbean, down to Trinidad, Venezuela, and Bonaire before coming back up to the east coast of the States and kind of wrapping that first cruise up in Virginia. So that was our first big adventure. We call it our 3-year honeymoon.
Wow. And yeah, that whole 24/7, I'm sure, was a big deal for the newlyweds. Just give a quick wrap-up of where else you've gone. I know you went across the Atlantic, right?
We met friends by connecting with them via the ham radio, and they invited us to crew for them on their Sundeer 60 going across the Atlantic from St. Martin to Spain and then on into Rome. We actually flew back from Rome. Since then, we took our kids, who were 8 and 10 at the time. They're now 23 and 25. We took them for a year to the Bahamas, and they left the house. We sold the house during the pandemic. 2020, we sold our house that we had lived in for a long time in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we cruised on Calypso a little bit, took Mischief for a cruise to the Bahamas, and then this is the big one on Calypso. We're planning, if the weather will ever cooperate with us, we're planning on going through the canal and heading off to French Polynesia in spring of 2025. So a few things that we've got going on with a little boat.
That is all fantastic, and we are all looking to follow on. In the show notes, we'll put a link to Nica's tracker so that you can follow along. And also, I am trying hard that when she shares something on her Instagram, we pop it over on the Boat Galley's Instagram too, so you can follow what she's doing that with some of the other Boat Galley team members as well, so you can see where everybody's going.
That's lots of fun. Well, Carolyn, you've had a couple of different cruising boats and have had lots and lots of cruising experience. So can you tell us about the boats that you've got and what you're up to?
Oh boy, you asked for everything at once there. We actually had been, like in the late 90s, Dave and I had gone on several charter trips to the BVI, to Alaska, to Turkey, etc. And everywhere we'd go, we would end up walking the marinas, and we would talk about this idea of selling it all and going cruising for a while. Dave was already retired, and there's a 22-year age difference between us. So I had actually quit my job so that I would quote, be retired with him so that we would have our fun time together in life. Because, if we waited until I was 65, he'd be 87. That just wasn't going to work. Finally, we were sitting in Turkey on this charter boat, and we had walked around to Marina. We had gone aboard these people's boat that they were saying, hey, come and look at ours, and, we'll talk to you about cruising. And we were sitting there and having a glass of wine, and Dave looked at me and said, I'm not getting any younger. If we're going to do this, we need to do it now. And, he was 64 at the time. We came back to the States after that trip. Within a month, we had made the plans to go visit this boat that looked, at least online, like the perfect boat. We went down, we looked at it. It was in Mexico on the Pacific coast side, and we signed on the dotted line. And that was at the beginning of July, basically at the end of hurricane season. We piled up everything into our truck and took off down there. Now, what we did, and what I like to encourage other people to do who are thinking about something like this, particularly if you're a little bit older in life, etc. We kept our apartment for 6 months, actually I guess 8 months after we, quote, made the move. We wanted that out, that we knew we had a place to go back to. So we had our car, we had our apartment, we had everything in it. The only things we took out were the stuff that we were taking to the boat. And I really think that that's a good idea.
I think that's a super smart point, particularly if you have not gone cruising before, and particularly if you feel like you want to go back to where you started from. But it gives you an out, gives you a safety valve, and you may decide that you love cruising, and that's great, and then you can sell the house or apartment later. But you may say, you know what, I actually need that land-based life, and I need to be able to go back. So, Carolyn, what kind of a boat was that first one that you bought?
Our first boat was a Tayana 37, so it was a big, heavy, go-anywhere boat, 6-foot draft. They're a great boat. That boat could withstand far more than Dave and I ever could.
So that was the first boat, and the first boat was named
K-Tal. And we had that boat for actually almost 8 years, but we were really actively cruising it 7 years.
So do you recommend that somebody use that boat name as yours? I'm just thinking about some stories that you've told us.
Absolutely not. K-Tal is a greeting in Spanish. It's like, what's up, what's happening, that kind of thing. And it basically ends up being the who's on first type of routine, because you're pulling into a marina or into a new port, and you're calling in. And on the radio, it's like, Marina, 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 K-Tal. And they're like, boat calling Marina. Hello. And what is the name of your boat?
K-Tal! Wow. Okay, so K-Tal, and then why did you decide to move on from K-Tal?
Dave was having some health problems, so we moved back to Illinois, and we went ahead and sold the boat. After 7 years, we were looking at each other and going, I kind of miss this whole boat thing. And the original plan was that we were just going to come to Florida. We were going to at least live on a boat in the wintertime. We were thinking that probably we were just going to be mostly staying at a dock and doing some day sails.
How'd that work out for you?
Yeah, well, we decided that we were just having way too much fun going places, and everybody was talking about their fun going to the Bahamas and all these places in the Keys and everything else. And so after the very first winter, we went back to Illinois long enough to put the house up for sale. And we managed to do the unthinkable, and we put the house for sale at 8:30 in the morning, and we had a signed contract at 5 o'clock that afternoon, except the couple that were buying it wanted to close within 3 weeks. So while we thought we were going to have one more last summer at the lake up in Illinois and enjoying all of that, instead we were packing everything up and going to our boat, which was on the hard in the middle of the Everglades, in July 1st, which is just beautiful weather in the Everglades. Let me tell you, not.
Little buggy, little hot, little muggy.
Absolutely. But Barefoot Gal was a great boat for the Florida Keys and Bahamas. She is a Gemini catamaran, only 34 feet long, draws about 2.5 feet. able to motor, etc. at that point. She was a great boat for that, but she was very definitely a coastal cruiser, much more lightly built, very, very different boat, about as far opposite as you could get from our Tayana 37. We loved her also.
Lots of good memories. And how long, do you still have Barefoot Gal? I know the answer to this, but I'm just asking anyway.
Just a little over a year ago, we sold her. Dave is now 86 and has had several heart conditions, no heart attacks or anything, but he's had a couple of major surgeries, a number of hospitalizations, things like that. And it just frankly got to the point where we realized that trying to keep and maintain the boat was not working. On one hand, yes, I could have done a lot of the chores that needed to be done on the boat, but when Dave is in the hospital, I am with him at the hospital. I'm not working on the boat. And we kind of kept it going for 2 years through stuff like that. And finally, one day we just looked at each other and said, this is absolutely not working. So what we do now is we live in West Palm Beach. We very much wanted to be a place that still had good access to the water. We live only 3 blocks off the city docks, where the dinghy docks are. So when all of our friends like Nica, Larry, who's another part of the team, John, who's part of the team, any of the rest of them come through here, we're all doing stuff. And also, all winter, pretty much every Friday night, we have a meetup up at O'Shea's Irish Pub from 5 to 7 on Friday nights.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes so you can see that. If you happen to be in West Palm, either by land or by boat, come on. It's walkable from the dinghy dock, which is pretty great.
Absolutely. And we love actually meeting people in person because, like for both Nica and I, we're sitting in this foam-lined 4-foot by 4-foot room talking to while looking at a computer screen, actually having people to talk to, faces, people smile, people's eyes light up. That's one of the best things that can happen. It's one of the reasons we do the boat show every year, too.
It's really fun when we meet people because it's easy to think we're just talking to a void. And when we hear from people, it's like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Actually, people are listening. So how long did you have Barefoot Gal?
We had Barefoot Gal a little over 10 years, 10 and a half years.
Okay, because where I was going in my head was people talk about 7 years, kind of the 7-year itch, and you certainly had 7 years on Catal, and then you had 7 years on land again, and then you had a little over 7 years on Barefoot Gal. But so it sounds like I've got a small boat. Carolyn's we have 2 small boats. We're not putting them together. They're not a weird catamaran. It's not his or hers. That's not our plan with those 2 boats. But we have... Maybe you've learned a little bit about Carolyn and about me, and maybe just one quick one. What made us start this podcast? I'm throwing Carolyn completely. She had no idea I was going to ask that question, but I know that this started. You were doing things with a guy named Mike over at Boat Radio for a while, and then want to share some more.
Yeah, the whole podcast got started actually because of a thing called Boat Radio, and it was going to actually be a radio program. And within the first couple months, it got switched over to a podcast because people wanted it to be on demand instead of listening in on a schedule. But that's what first got me doing it. And I did Boat Radio for a couple of years, and then Boat Radio ended up being discontinued. And around that time, Nica and I had gotten to know each other at some boat shows. We were both teaching at Cruisers University. And I commented to her something like, well, Boat Radio is going away. And she looked at me and said, well, why don't we just take the podcast private, and do our own?
Meanwhile, I was about to start doing some things with Boat Radio. And so my head had started to go to the podcast route. And then we just decided that we were going to team up and do the podcast together. So it's been quite a fun ride at this point. It's been quite a number of years.
Absolutely, and we've got over 750 episodes. We're actually cruising towards 800 at this point, and I think we're still planning to continue it for a while.
I think we are too. It might be interesting to see how this happens as we get further afield, just with internet and that sort of thing. We on Calypso have not yet hit the Starlink route, so it'll be interesting to see how well I can put things in and edit them and get them uploaded before we go on long passages so that we have enough in the bank to keep this going. But that is the plan. But we love doing the podcast, particularly when we hear from our listeners and when people come up and talk to us at the boat show or come to the meetup and talk about the podcast, because it's kind of fun for us that way.
And with that, I think that's it for this episode of the Boat Galley Podcast. We hope that you're enjoying this, and particularly that you're enjoying these things where Nica and I are talking back and forth. This is way out of my comfort zone to be doing it just with, at best, a slight outline of what we're going to talk about. Although I really do always enjoy talking to people face to face and giving them ideas and thoughts. But please give us ideas of what you'd like to hear. Subscribe to the Boat Galley Podcast and tell your friends about it.
And if you see Calypso in an Anchorage, or if you're in West Palm Beach, come by and say hi. We love sharing this whole thing with lots and lots of people. Have the most spectacular week.